When Daniel discovers his wife Emily's affair, his perfect world shatters. Fueled by betrayal and heartbreak, he meticulously collects evidence, preparing to expose the truth and reclaim his dignity. But as he confronts Emily, her desperate pleas reveal the depth of her own turmoil. What begins as a story of vengeance and justice spirals into an unexpected and devastating tragedy, forcing Daniel to grapple with the remnants of a love lost and the haunting cost of betrayal. In this gripping tale of love, deceit, and redemption, the line between victim and villain blurs in heartbreaking ways. The restaurant receipt sat on the passenger seat of my car as I drove home that evening, my thoughts spiraling in directions I didn't want to go. It was just a piece of paper, a printed record of a meal enjoyed somewhere far removed from me. Yet it felt heavier than anything I'd carried in a long time. The date was last Friday, a day when Emily had claimed she was bogged down with work. I told myself it was nothing. There were always plausible explanations. Maybe it was a business meeting, or maybe she'd gone out with colleagues to unwind after a grueling day. Still, the questions gnawed at me. Emily was my wife of 12 years. She was sharp, confident, and capable of commanding a room with her presence. Her career as a project manager for a prominent architecture firm had been demanding, but we always found time for each other. Or so I thought. Lately, though, there had been a distance between us, a vague, intangible feeling that something had shifted. When I got home, the house was quiet. Emily wasn't due back until later, and the kids were staying over at their grandparents' for the weekend. The silence felt oppressive, so I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the receipt. I told myself it was stupid to dwell on it. If I asked her, she'd probably have a perfectly reasonable explanation. And yet, I didn't ask. Instead, I placed the receipt in the drawer with the takeout menus and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily that night. My mind kept circling back to the receipt and the odd feeling I'd had lately about Emily's late nights. It wasn't like her to be secretive, but there had been moments, an awkward silence when I asked about her day, or a hurried excuse when she had to step out to take a call. By the time the sun rose, I decided to let it go. I wouldn't let paranoia drive a wedge between us. That was the plan, at least, until the phone bill arrived the following week. It was just a routine piece of mail, one I usually scan through without much thought. But something made me pause. A number with an area code I didn't recognize appeared repeatedly. Texts and calls, all late at night. My heart sank as I flipped through the pages. The same number appeared again and again. I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was a new client or a vendor from her work, but the timing of the calls was hard to ignore. I told myself I wouldn't jump to conclusions. Instead, I jotted down the number and ran a quick search. It was tied to a small business in another city, hours away. That wasn't comforting. In fact, it only added fuel to my growing suspicion. That evening, I sat across from Emily at the dinner table, watching her closely as she recounted her day. She was animated, her laughter ringing out as she shared a story about a coworker's mishap during a meeting. But I wasn't really listening. I was too focused on her expressions, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Was she lying? Was there something she wasn't telling me? I hated the thoughts running through my head, hated the man I was becoming. But something inside me couldn't let it go. When Emily said she had another late night at work coming up, I decided to test my suspicions. I casually suggested dropping by with dinner, thinking it would catch her off guard. Her reaction was subtle, but it was enough. She hesitated, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Oh, you don't have to do that," she said, waving me off. "I'll probably just grab something quick. You know how hectic these nights can be." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. But inside, my resolve hardened. The night of her supposed late shift, I told her I'd be working late myself and watched her leave the house with a casual goodbye. Once she was gone, I slipped into her car and planted a GPS tracker in her bag. It was a desperate move, but I needed the truth. The tracker app was simple to use. As I sat at the kitchen table, the dots on the screen told a story I couldn't deny. She wasn't at her office. She wasn't even in the city. Instead, she was parked outside a boutique hotel miles away. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking as anger and disbelief coursed through me. I wanted to drive to the hotel, to confront her and demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of what I'd find, or fear of what I might do in the heat of the moment. Instead, I stayed home, waiting for her return. When she walked through the door hours later, her hair slightly disheveled and her makeup smudged, I felt the weight of my suspicions solidify into something real. She smiled at me, dropping her bag on the counter and kissing me on the cheek. "How was your night?" she asked, her tone light and casual. "Fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Exhausting," she said with a sigh. "I can't wait to get to bed." I watched her head upstairs, the sound of her footsteps fading as she reached our room. My eyes drifted to her bag on the counter, and my hand clenched into a fist. The betrayal was written in every action, every word she spoke. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't sleep beside her that night. Instead, I stayed in the living room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how the woman I'd built a life with could lie so easily. By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds as I sat in the kitchen, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. My mind churned with a mix of anger and resolve. Emily entered the room a few minutes later, still in her robe, her hair slightly mussed from sleep. She smiled at me, a warm, familiar expression that now felt hollow. "Good morning," she said, leaning in for a quick kiss on my cheek. I forced a smile in return, nodding. "Morning." The lie felt like a stone lodged in my chest. I wanted to confront her, to throw everything I knew onto the table and demand answers. But I held back. The truth wasn't enough, I needed proof, something undeniable that couldn't be explained away. Without it, she'd only deny, twist the narrative, and leave me questioning my own sanity. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, pretending everything was normal. Emily hummed around the house, checking her phone intermittently, her face lighting up with an expression I couldn't ignore. Whoever was on the other end of those messages held her attention in a way I no longer could. That evening, after she left for another supposed late meeting, I sprang into action. Her laptop was open on the dining table, the screen locked but begging for exploration. I hesitated for only a moment before typing in the password. My hands shook as I entered it, our anniversary date. To my dismay, and relief, it worked. The inbox stared back at me, a mixture of mundane work emails and personal notes. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting until I saw his name, Adam. A single thread of emails stood out, each one filled with words that burned into my memory. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I miss you already. When can we see each other again?" I scrolled through, my heart pounding in my chest. Each message was a nail in the coffin of our marriage, each sentence a knife twisting deeper. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. She was having an affair. I read until the words blurred on the screen. My hands clenched into fists, rage surging through me in waves. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the ease with which she carried it out, the complete disregard for what we had built together. I needed to cool off before she returned. Grabbing my jacket, I stepped out into the crisp evening air and walked aimlessly through the neighborhood. The quiet streets offered no solace, only time to stew in my thoughts. By the time I returned home, the house was dark, save for the faint glow of the TV in the living room. Emily had returned, her figure silhouetted against the screen. She didn't hear me enter, her attention fixed on her phone. I lingered in the doorway, watching her, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the stranger I saw before me. The evidence sat heavy in my pocket, screenshots of the emails, the GPS data, and the texts I'd forwarded to my phone. When she finally noticed me, she smiled. "Hey, you're home late. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Just went for a walk." "Good," she said, turning back to her phone. "You need to relax more." The irony of her words made me want to laugh and scream all at once. Instead, I nodded and walked upstairs to our bedroom, my mind racing with plans. It was clear that confronting her now would only lead to a fight, one that might leave me feeling more hollow than before. No, I needed to be smart about this. Over the next week, I played the part of the oblivious husband perfectly. I smiled at her jokes, laughed at her stories, and even planned a date night. All the while, I collected more evidence, building an airtight case for the inevitable fallout. I found receipts for hotels, restaurants, and gifts hidden in her purse and car. Her bank statements revealed large withdrawals that didn't align with anything she had told me. Each discovery fueled my determination to expose her betrayal in the most unshakable way possible. The date night came as a surprise to her, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. She hesitated when I suggested dinner at our favorite restaurant, but I insisted, painting it as a way to reconnect. As we sat across from each other in the dimly lit dining room, Emily seemed uneasy, her gaze darting between her phone and the table. I pretended not to notice, engaging her in conversation and reminiscing about the early days of our marriage. She smiled at the memories, but it was forced, her laughter hollow. When dessert arrived, I decided to test her. "You've been working so hard lately," I said. "We should take a weekend trip, just the two of us. Leave work behind for a bit." Her smile faltered, and she quickly masked it with a sip of wine. "That sounds nice, but things are just so busy right now. Maybe in a few weeks." "Of course," I said, feigning understanding. "Whenever you're ready." The lie was written all over her face, and I wondered if she could see the truth in mine. By the time we left the restaurant, I had solidified my plan. Emily didn't know it yet, but her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. I had given her every opportunity to come clean, to salvage some shred of honesty in our marriage. But she had chosen her path, and now it was my turn. The night before my plan was set to unfold, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the screenshots on my laptop. This wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and my future. For 12 years, I had given Emily everything, and she had thrown it away for a fleeting affair. Now, it was time for her to face the consequences. The morning began like any other. Emily sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee as she scrolled through her phone. I watched her from across the room, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Today was the day everything would change. She had no idea. I had spent the last few days carefully preparing. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, emails, texts, receipts, and GPS data, was organized and ready. My plan was simple: expose the truth in a way she couldn't deny. But it wasn't just about confronting her. It was about reclaiming my narrative, the life she had tried to rewrite without my consent. Emily looked up, smiling at me. "Any plans for today?" "Just the usual," I said, keeping my tone casual. "What about you?" "Same here. Meetings and deadlines." She stood and placed her mug in the sink. "I might be late again tonight. Don't wait up." "Of course," I said, masking my emotions. "Good luck with your day." She kissed me on the cheek and left, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I waited until her car pulled out of the driveway before springing into action. This was it. By the time Emily returned that evening, the house was dimly lit, the dining room table set with candles and a bottle of wine. She looked surprised, her expression wavering between curiosity and guilt. "What's all this?" she asked, placing her bag on the counter. I thought we could have a quiet dinner, I said, motioning for her to sit. It's been a while since we've had a night to ourselves. She hesitated, then nodded. That sounds nice. The meal was already prepared, her favorite, a dish I hadn't made in years. We ate in near silence, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. She complimented the food, but her eyes kept darting toward the wine bottle, as if trying to gauge my intentions. When we finished, I poured us both another glass of wine and leaned back in my chair. The time had come. Emily, I began, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. She froze, her glass halfway to her lips. About what? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the folder labeled Evidence. One by one, I placed the screenshots on the table between us, the emails, the GPS logs, the receipts. Her face paled as she stared at them, her composure unraveling with every passing second. What is this? She whispered. You tell me, I said, my gaze unwavering. You've been lying to me, Emily. For months, maybe longer. She shook her head, her voice trembling. Daniel, it's not what it looks like. Then what is it? I asked, my voice rising. Because it looks like you've been cheating on me. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached for my hand. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Don't, I said, pulling my hand away. You've had plenty of chances to come clean, Emily. I've given you every opportunity to tell me the truth, and you chose to lie. Over and over again. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, a fleeting reminder of the woman I had loved for 12 years. But it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. Why? I demanded. Why would you do this to us? To our family? She looked up, her face streaked with tears. I don't know. I was lonely, I guess. You've been so busy with work, and I felt invisible. Invisible? I repeated, incredulous. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to give us the life we have? Everything I've done has been for you and the kids. I know, she said, her voice barely audible. I know, and I hate myself for it. But it just happened. I didn't plan for it to go this far. Her words were a slap in the face. You didn't plan for it to go this far. Emily, this isn't some mistake you made once. This is a pattern. A conscious decision to betray me, again and again. She reached for me again, but I stood, pacing the room in an effort to contain my anger. I can't do this anymore, I said. I deserve better than this. What are you saying? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm saying we're done, I replied, my tone final. I want a divorce. Her sobs grew louder as she pleaded with me to reconsider. Please, Daniel. Don't do this. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Just give me another chance. I shook my head. It's too late for that. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. For the rest of the evening, she begged and bargained, but my resolve didn't waver. By the time she finally retreated to the guest room, I felt a sense of relief, like a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been lifted. I spent the night drafting my next steps, consulting a lawyer, dividing our assets, and preparing to move forward without her. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was the right decision. As I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering candlelight, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long time, I could see a future beyond the betrayal, a future where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. Emily had shattered the foundation of our marriage, but I was determined to build something stronger in its place. This was the beginning of my new chapter, and I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, define it for me. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, filing paperwork, and navigating the logistics of untangling 12 years of shared life. Emily and I barely spoke unless it was about the children or the division of assets. The silence between us was deafening, filled with the echoes of what once was and the void of what would never be again. I thought I was handling it well, convincing myself that this was the right path. There was a cold clarity in knowing where I stood, in reclaiming control of my life. But clarity didn't dull the pain. Each night, as I lay in the too quiet house, I found myself haunted by memories of Emily's laugh, her touch, and the warmth we once shared. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I heard the faint sound of her voice. It was coming from the guest room, muffled and broken. I hesitated at the door, unsure if I should intrude. But something in the tone of her cries, raw and desperate, compelled me to step inside. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone, her face streaked with tears. She didn't notice me at first, her body shaking as sobs racked her frame. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hollow, filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She hesitated before answering, her words spilling out in a torrent. "Adam. He ended things. He said I was too much baggage, that he couldn't handle the drama." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat but swallowed it. "So, that's it. He walks away, and now you're broken." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "It's not just about him. It's everything. What I've done to us, to you, to the kids. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if I deserve to." I didn't have an answer for her. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her that she had made this bed. But another part, the part that had loved her for so long, wanted to reach out and comfort her. In the end, I did neither. I simply turned and left the room. The next day, I threw myself into work, desperate to escape the weight of it all. By the time I returned home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. The kids were at my parents' for the weekend, but Emily's car was in the driveway. "Emily." I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. No answer. I climbed the stairs, my chest tightening with each step. The guest room door was ajar, and the sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. Emily was lying on the bed, her face pale and her body unnaturally still. Beside her was an empty bottle of pills and a crumpled note. My legs buckled as I rushed to her side, my hands trembling as I shook her. "Emily. Wake up." Her skin was cold, her chest unmoving. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The operator's voice was calm, but I could barely register her words as I followed her instructions, performing CPR with tears streaming down my face. The paramedics arrived minutes later, though it felt like an eternity. They worked tirelessly, their movements efficient and determined. But I could see it in their faces, the grim acknowledgement that it was too late. They confirmed what I already knew, Emily was gone. The funeral was a blur. Friends and family offered their condolences, their words hollow and meaningless. The kids were inconsolable, their young minds struggling to comprehend the loss. And I was a shell, moving through the motions with a numbness that terrified me. In the days that followed, I found myself reading and rereading her note. It was short, just a few sentences scrawled in her familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry for everything. For the lies, the betrayal, and the pain I caused you. I loved you, Daniel. I always will. Please take care of our children and remind them that I loved them too. I just couldn't carry this guilt anymore." I wanted to hate her for what she'd done, for the affair, for abandoning us, for leaving me to pick up the pieces. But all I felt was an overwhelming sadness, a crushing sense of failure. Somewhere along the way, we had lost each other, and now there was no way to find our way back. Months passed, and life moved on, as it always does. The kids returned to school, their laughter slowly returning, though it carried an undertone of sadness. I sold the house, unable to bear the memories that lingered in its walls. We moved to a smaller place, closer to my parents, where I could focus on rebuilding what was left of our family. But at night, when the world was quiet, I often found myself staring at her photo, a bittersweet smile frozen in time. I wondered if things could have been different if I had seen the signs earlier, if I had fought harder for our marriage. The questions haunted me, their answers forever out of reach. The truth was, there were no winners in this story. Just two broken people who couldn't find their way back to each other. And while life went on, a part of me would always carry the weight of what was lost.